U.S. Forest Service employees are reeling after a previous hiring freeze collided with recent mass layoffs, directed by Elon Musk and the Trump administration. As A.J. Williams reports, Montanans could soon feel the consequences of a smaller Forest Service.
It's another lively day at the state capitol, as these Montanans hope their rally calls for public lands are heard in the face of the recent federal cuts. But the fight for funding public lands goes further back than the administration change. The U.S. Forest Service was already dealing with a downsized workforce, and the effects have been seen on the ground. Skier Sam Galindo prepares for another afternoon skinning up Marshall Mountain just beyond Missoula.
I wonder if I can get him to stand up. There we go. Ready to go skiing.
So I'm a pretty new backcountry user, so this is only my second season. When you go into the backcountry, you want to know what you're heading into and be able to prepare and plan for it. And the avalanche forecast is by far the most helpful portion of that.
The U.S. averages 27 avalanche-related deaths every year. Galindo relies on avalanche forecasts to travel across forest land safely, but earlier this season, they weren't available.
I didn't know what the snow was going to do, and I was kind of too scared to venture into avalanche terrain.
Galindo and other backcountry users were lacking data because of the Forest Service hiring freeze that went into effect last fall. That hiring freeze began after Congress was projected to cut $500 million from the Forest Service's operating budget. Forest Service Chief Randy Moore stated the freeze was aimed at keeping the agency in line with possible budgetary constraints. They also promoted 1,300 to 1,400 workers to permanent positions using temporary Inflation Reduction Act funding, which several members of Congress criticized, and which put the agency in an economic bind. Now, with a new administration in office, the Forest Service faced additional layoffs of their workforce. 3,400 Forest Service permanent employees, many of which were recently promoted, were let go as a part of the federal spending cuts at the directive of the Department of Government Efficiency, better known as DOGE. At least 360 of those who lost their jobs were Montanans. And according to experts, these changes follow years of Congress already underfunding the service.
Since the 1980s, really, the U.S. Congress has pretty consistently underfunded the Forest Service and other public lands agencies. And so suddenly your staff salaries have gone up, but you don't have the budget to cover that. So that was another kind of piece to building a budget crisis.
But many in Congress, including some of Montana's delegation, are critical of how the Forest Service uses its funding, citing wasteful spending and subpar forest management.
Many important forest management projects that would decrease the risk of catastrophic wildfires have been halted. It's just troubling at a time when we're seeing increasingly buildups of hazardous fuels that the target of the Forest Service actually went down year over year. From 4.2 million to 4 million. I mean, you've got to look at where you got to spend, where you got to target. But I raise that as a real concern when you think about that's an investment too to try to reduce the cost to fight catastrophic wildfires. This is kind of pay me now or pay me later, and you pay a lot more later.
So I'm sure the Great American Outdoors Act has been very, very helpful. Yes. My concern is that it was intended to make sure that it goes to infrastructure. And I believe housing was part of that infrastructure on that. But it seems as I review it, a lot of it's going to studies. So, so if you just look at that and just I ask you to look at it and make sure that the focus was on getting things done and not doing analysis of how to get things done.
Eisen advocates that studies are important for understanding the health and use of our public lands, and acknowledges the importance of being on the ground for that work.
You can't manage recreation if you just hang out in your office all day. You have to get in a vehicle and go into the field. You have to put gas in your snowmobile to go, see what the snow conditions are. So starting in October, there's really strict limits around how agency employees can spend money and that affects the winter recreation program as well. A significant amount of winter recreation is also dependent on seasonal employees.
In the initial Forest Service hiring freeze, 2,400 seasonal employees were cut. Wildland firefighters were exempt from the freeze, but avalanche centers were not.
None of this stuff happens in a vacuum, and all of it costs money. And currently the Forest Service has been mandated that they are responsible for avalanche forecasting and public safety in wintertime recreation, but it is an unfunded mandate.
The West Central Montana Avalanche Center employs multiple snow scientists to test conditions and write a report for the public to use when making decisions about backcountry travel. They forecast for a large area within multiple national forests that jointly fund their work. The initial Forest Service hiring freeze put their agreement and their forecasts in limbo.
If there aren't experts out there to highlight the dangers and highlight the warnings, then the public at the end of the day is uninformed. Finding a way for our communities to be safer, for friends and family to come back from playing at the end of the day alive and ready to do it again tomorrow has value and has merit.
The center was able to sign a 1-year contract, hiring 2 employees for avalanche forecasting this winter. However, Hutchins says that their funding remains uncertain for winters going forward. The future of staffing and managing Montana's public lands remains uncertain too. In a recent visit to the Montana legislative session, 3 members of the state's delegation shared their support of DOJ's work.
What we've seen these past few weeks is a radical reform of the federal government, and we're reforming the federal government so it works for, not against, the people of Montana.
Combating inflation, fiscal policy, that's one of the hardest parts. And we're going to be faced with that here in the near future of dealing with our budget reconciliation, getting appropriations bills through, figuring out how we fund the government without, causing it to go bankrupt. And so that's going to be a lot of, tightening of the belts, a lot of hard work. Nobody's going to get everything that they want, but we need to fight this back because the direction that we've been going in this country is not sustainable.
So where are we going to find the savings? Because all of us, like you, are fiscally responsible because that's our duty. Because it's the debt that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's a time bomb, and we all know it. And I can tell you 36 trillion reasons why it is. But it's fixable. It's fixable as all of us work together.
With reductions in funding, the Forest Service has been relying on partner organizations like the Montana Conservation Corps as a cost-effective way to get work done.
We have a big impact on our public lands, and that's anywhere from just clearing trails to building new trails to rerouting problem trails, and everything in between. All the structures we build, the bridges, the turnpikes. There's different categories of trail maintenance, and we dabble in all of them. And really the primary push often is, at this point, is to just get trails open for public use.
This season, they could be leaning on those partnerships even more. Grillo says that when the hiring freeze was announced last fall, they expected to step in as a partner organization of the Forest Service and take on additional conservation work previously done by seasonal Forest Service employees.
We are a fee-for-service organization. That's our model. So we field crews of 4 to 6 people to actually go do a project for our partners. And in exchange, they pay us for the work. And those payments are guaranteed through this participating agreement.
Through their agreement, MCC trail crews coordinate on-site work with Forest Service recreation technicians, most of whom lost their jobs. With limited staffing from the Forest Service hiring freeze and federal workforce cuts, their trail projects for the season are on pause. Losing positions like avalanche forecasters and trail workers may have impacts on public safety, and there may be other windfalls that impact Montanans, such as tourism and recreation dollars that contribute to Montana's economy. Outdoor recreation makes up 4.3% of the state's GDP, according to the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research, putting Montana as number 3 in the nation for percentage of GDP. Montana has 12.5 million visitors on average each year. most of whom come to visit public lands. Their research also indicates that having access to amenities such as bathrooms, trash disposal, paved trails, and ranger presence, which are handled by seasonal employees and contractors, are important for a positive visitor experience.
There's a lot of recreation use, and that has been growing and growing and growing. And then with the COVID pandemic, the curve went exponential, right? We've all seen how many more people there are out recreating. We want the Forest Service to manage wildfires, to conduct timber sales, to protect habitat. And there's a lot of recreation that we are asking for opportunities, whether it's, make sure that this road is maintained so I can drive to my favorite campground. And then I want the campground to be open when I get there.
Reducing the federal workforce will have impacts on employment, on NGOs. These are livelihoods, these are jobs. This is what people do to make money. And if that goes away, that's a real impact. I hope that people understand that there are real consequences to the loss of work associated with public lands management.
Agencies and organizations hold tight and brace for more federal cuts. At the moment, the uncertainty around staffing public lands is not just felt by the employees, but Montanans, as winter thaws into the next season with fewer services for the places many love to roam. For Impact, I'm AJ Williams.
The layoffs at the Forest Service were targeted at probationary employees, which includes both recent hires and those recently promoted or reclassified. A USDA spokesperson told us, quote, "Secretary Rollins is committed to preserving essential safety positions and will ensure that critical services remain uninterrupted."